Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Proof of Coordination series, which is actually the second one. I'm Eric, your host today and social media manager here at NodeOps. And today we're diving deep into the economics of decentralized infrastructure with two brilliant minds. We have Mustafa from Volt Capital, an expert in optimal control theory, which is, of course, the topic and subject of today's conversation and episode, and Harrie, who is our docs lead, but at the minute, given the phase that we're in, the tokenomics expert here at NodeOps. We're going to explore at a high level the how mathematical frameworks can optimize DePIN economics and how NodeOps is pioneering revenue-backed tokenomics. So that said, before we sort of jump in into the ins and outs of the discussion, why don't we start by sort of brief introductions. So Mustafa, first things first, thanks for joining us today, and yeah, over to you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on. Thanks to NodeOps and for having me on. I'm excited to chat about this. Um, yeah, so I'm a research engineer at Volt Capital. I kind of started off in crypto at the Ethereum Foundation doing research in crypto economics on EIP 1559. So doing kind of game theory simulation stuff. Then I worked at Six Man Ventures where I did some research as well. That was more data sciencey research, looking at protocol decisions, how they actually fared when you look at the data. And at Volt, we kind of focus on a more rigorous approach to building a framework, building a foundation for different sectors. We thought DePIN is something that needs a lot of academic treatment. That when you compare it to something like DeFi, it's not really there. So that's something that I've been focusing on is using the tools available to us in math and dynamical systems, et cetera, to make better decisions for DePIN founders and protocols.
Awesome, Harrie.
Hi, everyone. So I've been in the space since about 2017, and one of my kind of like pre lives, I used to run an agency that provided statistical analysis, write-ups and reports and deep dives on where things have gone wrong. So I've always been interested in the data side, and there's something quite exciting about actually having a level of control over your economy, which is what Web3 has promised for a long time, that the greater economy cannot do. And so, yeah, I'm always interested on the tokenomics side of projects. So it's very exciting to be at this stage in NodeOps life cycle.
Awesome. I was not aware of that past of yours, so it's great to have these conversations to find out such details. So let's jump into it. In terms of for those unfamiliar, right, in the amongst the audience, Mustafa, would you be able to explain, please, the optimal control theory, right, in simpler slash layman terms, and why does this specific theory matter for decentralized networks?
Yeah, so control theory is something that has a lot of precedent, obviously. So it's an part of engineering in general, where you have normally in like physical systems, the system has some goal output, and you need some sort of component, which is called a controller, that measures all of the different metrics that are happening in the system and kind of steers it or guides it towards the optimal or the ideal case. Sometimes it might not do really harsh correction, but it will do, make sure things that are dangerous don't happen. So, for example, like a microwave has a controller in it to make sure that it doesn't, put way too much energy into it or something based on some, random effects. So, when you look at when you think about it in an abstract sense, you're really just looking at these large systems, which can be described with, if it's differential equations or whatever it is, it's a dynamical system. And you have a controller in there, which can affect things based on, its output at every time step or something. When you look at like a DePIN protocol, I think that there's a lot of parallels there, and that you can make a strong argument that you can apply that kind of framework because you have these, like Harrie said, you have control over your economy, so you have control over the relationships between the different components, and you can look at different design choices. Like the one that I've studied is inflation. Inflation can be you can look at the control policy, right? How are you dictating burning of tokens, minting of tokens, rewards, etc., based on a more dynamic, like holistic view of the system in general. That is kind of the idea, is that when you frame it that way, then we have a bunch of tools from this field of optimal control theory where you can model this all out. and then pick a controller. You can pick inflation. We can use that as an example, and find the optimal decision at every time step. So that can be really helpful if you're a protocol designer, because you want to test what your idea of an optimal inflation is against what the actual optimal may be, and there are methods to drive that. And you can tweak it basically that way. It gives you kind of like a quantitative way to measure the theoretical performance of your design choices.
Awesome. And now to make it a little bit more sort of pertinent and relevant, right, for the context of NodeOps Harrie, considering the recent evolution, right, considering that we are at the sort of forefront of innovation, that we've evolved from 3.7 million ARR NAS provider, right, which was sort of the main narrative from 2024, now into a generalized compute coordination layer. What I wanted to ask you is, like, how do you think that this revenue foundation changed the game for tokenomics compared to purely speculative tokens that we're so accustomed to seeing, right?
Yeah, good question. If I stick within the DePIN framework, because there's a lot of different model types out there, DePINs tend to start with high emissions, because what they're trying to do is drive the supply side of the network. They're trying to attract the providers in, and what they're doing is they're taking a long bet that emitted token will eventually provide a ROI, a return on investment, for that supplier. But that's quite a risky play. So launching a DePIN with recurring revenue from day one is a total game changer. I'm not sure if there's any instance we know of where somebody's done that before. And by linking our emissions to revenue from day one, we're creating a sustainable incentive structure. And what we're hoping is that early on, price discovery is directly linked to the token utility. And what that will mean is that the token's less prone to boom and bust cycles that you see in these purely speculative projects, and that we've got a stronger foundation, therefore, for long-term growth.
Wonderfully put. And also, as I was sort of looking at the optimal control theory, right? Of course, reviewing at length the report that you put together, the blog that you put together, Mustafa, which of course we also referenced when we hinted at it, and how it was sort of like a core component of how we approach. We I think it was Hitesh, right? If I'm not mistaken, that coined the DePIN 2.0 tokenomics term. Something I wanted to ask you is, like, how do you approach the challenge of balancing supply and demand in DePIN networks, also considering how wide-ranging these DePINs are by nature, considering the sub-verticals for which they are applied to, right?
Right. Yeah. I think from my perspective of what we're trying to do is we're building these tools that are as generally useful, as widely useful and applicable to founders across the verticals within DePIN even. And like you said, there's a lot of variation in what that supply and demand balance should look like. So in order to account for that in the way that we're kind of presenting this framework, is to kind of model the demand as this exogenous process that has some variability in it, has some shocks to it. It reacts to things like macro, et cetera. This is all implementation of the model details, but it's relevant because you can tweak that. And I think the best way to use this modeling approach is to tweak it for different cases that are significantly different. So you have really high demand, really low demand, really swingy up and down demand. Those kinds of things can be kind of tweaked and modeled kind of differently in different phases. And I think that gives you a better understanding of how your protocol and your the full implementation of your protocol reacts to all those different cases. So I think it really is case by case. I think it depends. If you're building something that has a strong geographical component, like helium or something, then you're probably going to get different supply and demand for different areas, and you have to like Harrie said. I think she made a great point about the fact that you have to kind of subsidize these nodes with a lot of inflation in the beginning, because you have to bootstrap that network. So that's going to look really different from something that's more DePIN AI compute, where you have a very different supply and demand model, and it's a lot more up and down depending on the whatever your kind of service you provide. So I know I'm not being very specific, but I think that's the point, is that you have to you can't be super specific about this. You have to take the model, take this framework, and then apply it to what you're doing and stress test it with different demand supply scenarios.
Totally agreed. And given how wide ranging the use cases are, right, for DePINs, and bring it back to NodeOps, considering that we are a generalized compute coordination layer. Harrie, we use a dynamic mint burn equilibrium, right? So what I wanted to ask is, at a high level, if you could elaborate on how this mechanism work, and more specifically also on how does it help avoid the token death spirals, right? And that we've often seen in other projects, without, of course, name dropping, because we're not here to do that.
Yeah, sure, of course. So what we do is we're thinking about this burn and mint algorithm as a homeostasis for our economy, a self-correcting mechanism, if you will. So token emissions and burn rates are adjust based on the network's usage. So the actual burn to mint ratio is set via governance, and it can be adjusted dynamically, taking into account token velocity, revenue velocity, and bonding participation. So what happens is on the burn side, 50% of the revenue, when as a user comes in and pays for services, 50% of that is burned. So that means when demand is high, the burn rate is high. Similarly, when demand is high, more tokens are minted to reward providers, but that's up to a daily cap. And so therefore, if demand drops, fewer tokens are emitted, and that should reduce supply growth and support price stability. So our predictions are that this dynamic approach will prevent oversupply, protect us from overinflation, which is so often seen in a static reward model, and therefore support our long-term sustainability for the token economy.
As always, couldn't have said it better. And so I asked you earlier, right, about the supply and demand. I think you hinted at it a little bit, Mustafa, but I wanted to ask you, because ever since I've been in this space, I've seen this, in the sense that more often than not, DePIN networks face a classic coordination challenge and issue, in the sense that on one side, you need the supply to attract the demand, right? And then on the other, you need the demand to justify the supply. So I wanted to ask you, how do you think the optimal control theory can help solve this, right? You can keep at a generalized level, or you can focus on a specific example. It will be great to hear your insight on this if possible.
Yeah, I think I'm of the opinion that you should always have like, for most protocols, I can't be fully generalized here, but for most protocols, you don't want your supply to be 100% met to capacity, where it's you need to have a little bit of extra there, and that requires, just to allow for the fluctuations in demand and stuff. That requires that those nodes that are not, they're not being accounted for, in the revenue, essentially, because they're not being used in full capacity, they need to be subsidized. So I think where optimal control theory comes in is that things like burn and mint equilibrium, in the way that they were first implemented, were not very dynamic, right? They're dynamic in the sense that they change, but they don't take in other factors or other variables as part of their inputs, right? And there's reasons for that, right? It can be too complex. It can be, you can go into these like weird areas of the state space where your controller might just destroy everything. So I understand why there's hesitant to do that, but I think where it's useful is that you can kind of like programmatically put in these constraints. Like, I want to have higher capacity than I do have demand, right? How is that related to inflation? Well, I need to ensure that those extra nodes are being subsidized, so we need to inflate enough so that they are being rewarded. All of those things can be expressed as like parts of your cost function, which is like a very key part of the optimal control, where you, at every step, you measure the cost, right? And this is kind of subjective in that you put in your costs, right? What are your costs? Do you want your capacity to be high? Do you want nodes to be incentivized to join? Maybe your rewards are really high. Maybe your service pricing is really low, so you can attract more demand. Those kinds of things you can put into the system, and then figure out the inflation policies that lead to that, essentially. So it's really just like tracing these connections between inflation and the things that you want to affect, and then measuring how to like best use that connection, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I mean, I would love to delve deeper into some of these answers, but we're here to sort of provide like an extensive overview of the topic at hand. Harrie, you mentioned earlier in your answer the term bonding, right, which is a key one, and it's extremely relevant considering that yesterday we released a blog on the bonding utility, which is the first one that we've sort of, without not even hinted at, actually announced and revealed, right? And considering that you are of course, the driving engine behind that piece, I wanted to take this opportunity to ask you, like, considering that NodeOps, the network requires 2,000 node to register a machine, right, from any given provider, and an extra 200 node per compute unit added to the network. How does this sort of staking requirement create, in your opinion, economic security while also maintaining accessibility for the network?
Sure. So it's a very important aspect, of course, because the requirement for providers to bond node ensures that they've got skin in the game. So the risk is their bond will be slashed if the service they provide is unstable, and that will deter bad actors. So we've got to balance the value of that bond against maintaining accessibility for providers to enter the marketplace, because you do, of course, want to encourage a decentralization of our compute node structure and a broad participation across the globe. So this balance is crucial. And like, we can adjust later should we need to, but at the moment this is our estimate of where the sweet spot is.
Totally. And this next topic is one that I'm particularly sort of excited to hear, Mustafa, your take on, is that launching a token is an imperfect science, right? I think you can never get it right. It's super subjective, and it's a combination of factors of the vertical you're in, market timing, and just like a plethora of other factors. And more often than not, there's always that dichotomy between long-term thinking and sort of short-term myopia, in a way, right? Where you want to make a specific, maybe stakeholder happy, or category, I think it's better, happy. So from an objective standpoint, which is the mathematical optimization standpoint, right? How do you think that? So, how should maybe DePIN protocols think about the trade-off between extracting revenue, right, now versus reinvesting in network growth, so towards a sustainable and long-term future?
Yeah, I think it's tough to answer that from a mathematical optimization point, because the the caveat here is, like, I think if you're going to use these tools and these models, right, you have to be very, very confident in what they cannot do. So I think that, I'm of the opinion that there is, like, this marginal benefit that good protocol design actually gives you, because we're all at the whim of the market. So, like, you can have incredible protocol design, and if Bitcoin goes down by a lot, your token's probably going to go down by a lot. So you can't control everything, obviously, but I do think that marginal benefit, whatever it is worth pursuing, because these are real people's money at stake and stuff. So it's important that we build it more like a bridge, and not like software where you make sure it works really well before putting it out there, because there's things at stake, and it's not like software where things can break and you can just fix it as you go, because people lose money. So that's kind of the caveat there. But I think I personally think that reinvesting in network growth is probably the short-term answer. That's like the simple answer, is that is probably what you should do, just because you need to, like, building the proper network effects to get like a real usable network is really hard. And I don't think that we've actually seen it yet in DePIN. I think we're still yet to see that. So I think, I think if you reinvest in making sure that your providers are happy, your providers are getting rewarded, you have loyal users, you have good service because they're making good profit. Those kinds of things are more important in the long term than extracting revenue. I still think obviously revenue is important. Like, the multiples that we see in DePIN are insane, but and revenue needs to go up for sure. But I would still skew towards reinvesting in network growth. I'm sorry if that's not satisfactory from an
No, it is.
objective standpoint, because I don't know that I could give an objective, like, mathematical answer to that, just because I haven't done the modeling on that long of time horizon.
No, but it does sort of align with what I was thinking, right? And totally, but we can have a separate discussion about this.
Yes,
And
yes.
for sure, something else that we did that I think as soon as I saw it was sort of very eye-opening was the credits, right, Harrie, which is the NodeOps credits. I mean, for you, Mustafa, is sort of the non-transferable consumption layer within the NodeOps network. And if I'm not mistaken, we went live with the Wave 1 claim in December. And we soon after we introduced the credits mechanism wherein people who claimed from Wave 1 were able to convert their node tokens, right? Bearing in mind that we're soon to launch, so this was months back, into credits and utilize those credits within the NodeOps network. So we introduced utility early on, way beyond even sort of approaching a conversation of a token launch. So I wanted to ask you, Harrie, like, how do you think that how does this address the token velocity problem that plagues many utility tokens out there?
Yeah, if we take a very broad and binary approach to what our potential token holding community will be, then we can say that people are either here for the computer or the casino. And NodeOps tokenomics is designed to reward the first group, those that are interested in the compute, by building in these levers that stabilize the token economy and reduce that volatility. So this conversion to credit system actually exists to support the mechanics of the token burn. So that means that as the user pays, whether they're paying in fiat, tokens, stable coins, 50% of the node value of that payment is burned. But what we're doing is to ensure stability, the value of the burn is pegged to the USD value of the service, not the current node price. So that means that regardless of whether node is trading higher or lower on the market, the amount of node burned is dynamically adjusted to always reflect the real underlying value of the compute service in dollars. So by anchoring that burn to USD, we're preventing the feedback loops where token price volatility can distort the economy. And we're trying to make that a mechanism that stabilizes the token economy by making that burn predictable, independent of speculative market swings, while also ensuring that that token's value is more closely tied to usage and demand for compute services. Now, that's a different answer I would have given you a few months ago when the token economy wasn't being discussed, because there, essentially, we were responding to a very troubled market where we wouldn't have wanted to launch a token and put those people who held Node at risk because there were no levers or controls. It would have just been a token in a dumping market. So back then, when we're kind of saying to people who've been loyal users from day one, here's a way to actually leverage the utility of your token by using our platform, our products and services. Whereas now I think the focus is far more interesting in that this credit system is how we can provide the mechanics of a burn. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I also appreciate the temporal reference, right? That back then it would have been different. Like it's it follows the thread of that's dynamic, right? And now that we've sort of laid the foundation from everything theoretical, there's a lot to unpick for listeners once the episode goes live. I'd like to make it a little bit more opinionated, right? So which is always fun, but of course always in the context of objective conversations. Mustafa, for you, right? Considering I mentioned a little bit earlier the term DePIN 2.0, but in the context of tokenomics, I just say this from either theoretical or practical standpoint. I also ask you after, Harrie, what do you see as the biggest unsolved challenge in DePIN tokenomics today? So maybe you can take it more at a sector level, and then maybe Harrie, you can use it if you want to laser in on NodeOps. It's up to you specifically.
Yeah, I think there's several. I think like I'm still I still think there's a lot of work to be done in bootstrapping a network, and that's a buzzword, I know, but it really is like the most important part of it. And I think like because there's a game there of like how do you over incentivize? Because you have to over incentivize, beyond what revenue is in order to get these people and to get nodes that are going to stay on your network and provide good service. How do you tweak those parameters? How do you tweak those rewards? How do you tweak inflation? I think those are the things that we don't have like solid or easy to follow replicatable answers to. And that's probably because it's really vertical dependent, and it is a dynamic game that you have to figure out. So that's probably the biggest problem I see. And then just the transitionary stage. I think this is still kind of a premature thing because we still have to do this bootstrapping really well. But the transitionary stage into a reliable, well-run, stable network is something that we haven't really figured out as well, because you have these over incentives and all these kind of things where people are getting paid way more than later adopters were, which is normal and kind of necessary. But once you get to that stable phase where the profit margins are not as massive for these nodes, how do you keep them on? How do you keep them honest? How do you ensure that the supply is still somewhat dynamic for the demand? Those are the biggest problems I see, and I think they require some level of this mathematical tooling and stuff to help make the decisions, but also just like trying things and seeing what works is probably the actual way that we'll get there.
Totally. Harrie, anything to add on maybe your personal spin on what you see as the biggest unsolved challenge? Of course, it could be.
I have to agree with Mustafa there. That is definitely a big challenge. I guess from my perspective, it's exciting, but one of our biggest challenges is that we need to facilitate a token economy that serves two very different audiences. We're a cloud marketplace, so we're going to attract Web 2 cloud consumers who care about reliability and performance and cost. They don't care about tokens. And the awesome thing is they never even need to think about tokens. Whereas we're also serving this Web3 community who are motivated by token incentives and participation rewards and want to perform governance. And achieving widespread adoption means making a platform that brings all of those groups together and ensures decentralization and economic efficiency and real utility to both of those groups. So that requires very clear value flows and tokenomics that can evolve as these tensions and demands change from these two groups that we're bringing together. So I think that's a big challenge ahead.
Totally agreed. And I think just hearing all your answers, there's this element of discovery, right? Like it's not like we found like the template that works. So NodeOps can be hopefully a pilot for future DePIN protocols launching in a year from now at something. Looking at our choices and decisions, see what worked, what didn't, and of course apply it to their specific domain, whether it's got to do with energy or connectivity or compute. So that's a beautiful position to be in, because we're now inheriting a written story, right? Like we're almost sort of writing it as we go, and being very transparent with our choices, which I think at the end of the day, that's all you can do, right? As you answer to such a broad array and range of stakeholders. And now, as we're approaching our mainnet, right, and launching one of this is for you, Harrie, of course, is like as we're wrapping things up, what tokenomics innovations are you most excited to implement, like personally speaking?
If I can have many, I'd say there's three big plays that are coming to fruition very shortly. And one, we're getting the historical revenue on chain. So that's a huge step. So from the onset of the revenue that's come in for NodeOps, it goes on chain. Two, we're getting to see our dynamic revenue-backed mint burn mechanism in action. So we're going to get to see how Node adapts to the network usage and demand. And three, our UNO holders can finally take up their Node Watcher role and become participants in the protocol's coordination layer. So there's a lot happening, all coming together very shortly.
Totally. And it's exciting few weeks ahead. There's a lot of exciting developments in the pipeline, and just stay tuned and watch our channels as always for official announcements. We're wrapping things up. This last question is to you both, and I look forward to hearing your take on this. Do you think revenue backed tokens will become the standard for infra projects, or no? Because I've seen on and on again, because I live on X, of course, given my role and responsibility within NodeOps, that revenue has become a little bit more of a meta once again, thank God, right? But Web3 is always controversial, and a business should be run on fundamentals and ensuring that you're putting to market a product that is of taste for your end user. So what do you think?
I think yes, and mainly because either by a narrative change like we're seeing now, or kind of like an evolutionary thing where the ones that will survive will be the ones that are revenue based, in a sense. So I think we're going to see that happen. It's like a, I don't know, if you try to explain to someone outside of Web3 that you can have it without, a revenue backed token, then it just doesn't make sense on face value. And I think it's like the root, even everything that I'm talking about here about modeling, optimal control theory, these are all dependent on the fact that you have revenue and that you're incentivizing revenue, because that's where value comes from. So obviously the value, I think revenue is value, and then you add on top of that with, like, I think the network itself is part of the token's value, which adds to that. But you still need revenue. So I think it's somewhat inevitable if we want to see DePIN like continue.
Yeah, and it's a strong yes from me. I mean, it reflects real world utility. Web3's been seeking this for years, but maybe you should ask first whether I'm computer or casino, and I'm deeply on the computer side. So of course I'm going to be far more interested in something that's offering a real world utility here. It's what so many of us came for, and we're so keen to actually see it implemented.
Yeah, I'll give you my personal take on the matter as well. This is sort of why I joined as well. It was sort of baffling to see, because I come from like a finance background. It was baffling to see how a lot of projects just got success or fame or whatever you want to call it with no product behind it. So it was all sort of fried air and noise and tokens and narrative. I think if you talk about narratives, it's because you don't have the marbles to actually back it. So you're sort of distracting the end user, and considering that the Web3 pace is just relentless, so it's ever going, it's easy sometimes to I wouldn't say trick, but maybe to hypnotize CT audience. But now I think it's the space is maturing, and it's inevitable that only the projects, regardless of which vertical they're in and which vertical they operate in, the ones that have revenue, because revenue means recognition. Ultimately, that's what it boils down to, right? It means that you actually have you bring in value to your end user, and there's nothing more exciting, and that's everything that NodeOps strives to achieve. And hopefully there's many more successful years to come. Guys, it's been very thought-provoking and eye-opening to chat to you. I would do this at length. Any parting thoughts or concluding remarks that you'd like to leave the listeners with, and then we'll wrap it up? Mustafa?
Yeah, I think I'm just excited to see what people do, what founders do in DePIN. I think DePIN is like, I'm also on the computer side, Harry, so I think we're in the same camp. And I think if you're on the casino, you probably don't have to worry about this kind of stuff, because it's not very, you can do whatever you want, and value will be created. But if we're doing this, and this is a serious real world infrastructure new paradigm, then I think that as investment grows towards this, and as more and more people build, I think we're going to see more and more interesting designs, and maybe learn more about the standard ways of doing this. So I'm just excited for this vertical. I think it's like a very promising and exciting space, and hopefully the work that we do at Volt can help improve the job that founders have to do. They don't have to sift through a bunch of academic papers, and they can just get to strong foundational results.
Yeah, Mustafa, I think it was such a joy for us to read your work and be validated in what we're trying to do, and have something that's actually a useful resource to help us design and build. Yeah, thanks so much for that. From my side, I would just say watch this space. We're obviously talking about tokenomics for a reason. We're very, very shortly going to be able to actually bring you the details of what we're planning. And yeah, watch this space, and it's landing soon.
Absolutely, Harrie is doing my job there effectively, which is to just be on your toes. It's it's coming soon. Let's just put it this way. So keep your eyes peeled on our official handles, and of course, if you have any kind of questions, don't shy away from commenting or messaging us on the relevant channels, such as X, Discord, and Twitter, and Telegram. A member of our team will be more than happy to assist you with any queries or doubts that you might have. guys, it's been very, very fun, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again. And of course, thank you for joining us today.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks.
Pleasure.